Let's finish up the hips by adding some rotate Z movement. We'll show our curves and select the hip control, going back to our graph view as well, and focusing now on the rotate Z. Okay, so for here, remember we want to focus on the steps with this. So the character starts to step up after frame 161. So let's go there and key our rotate Z to lock a pose there. And as the character is lifting up his right foot, it's at about its peak on frame 164. So we'll rotate the hips down to that direction. Okay, like that. And the foot plants in the Y at about frame 167. So we could go to 166. Bring up the hips slightly here. Okay, here's our keys. And then 2 frames after, we'll straighten them up some. Alright, great. So when we check it out, we get this nice looking pop when we scrub through. Great, just like what we want. And now that left foot starts coming up, and it gets to about its peak on about frame 72. So we'll go ahead and rotate the hips now to that direction. And it plants in the Y at about frame 76. So we'll go to frame 75. Bring up the hips slightly here. And 2 frames after, okay, we'll go ahead and straighten up the hips a little bit. Alright, so we get this nice pop. Great. So we'll go ahead and move on. Here we come to a point where the character is not stepping back until after frame 107. So on 107, we'll key our rotate Z to lock our pose there. And as that left foot's coming up, it gets to about its height on frame 112. So let's go ahead and rotate the hips a bit to that, more to the left there. Not as much, it's just a small step. Then it plants in the Y on 116, so on 115, we'll go ahead and bring up the hips some. And then about 2 frames after, when that foot is pretty much planted, totally planted, we'll go ahead and bring up the hips to straighten them out. Alright, great. We can even check out our right knee to make sure it's not locking up too much, so that we're not getting any IK pull. It's looking alright for now. And any adjustments we'll make to any other parts of our character will be done in the next lesson, where we'll focus on, again, doing our final adjustments to wrap up the light or the heavy pull. So we're just about done with this. Alright, so now we have the character's right foot coming up. And it gets to about its peak on frame 122, so we can go ahead and rotate the hips down there. And it plants in the Y at about 127, so 126, we'll bring them up slightly. And then 2 frames after or so, on frame 128, we can even straighten them out. Great. Alright, so now we're getting a good feeling of weight in the hips on that step. Okay, and here we come to another point where the character is not stepping back until after, so we're starting to step back after frame 142. So we'll just, on 142, key the rotate Z there. And as he lifts up his foot, it gets to about his peak on 148. So we'll rotate the hips now to the direction of the left foot coming up. Okay, not much, it's just a small step back. And the foot plants in the Y at about frame 151. So we could go to 150, straighten them up a bit, And at about 153, let's go ahead and straighten them up some more. Okay, for our hip pop there. All right, good. And then we come to our last footstep. So here the right foot is at about its peak height on 162. So we'll go ahead and rotate the hips to that direction on that frame. And the foot plant's at about 164. So we could go to, rather than going to 163, what we can actually do is go to 164, because we going to 163 would only give us a one frame change here, going from where we had added our poles on 162 to changing it up slightly on 163, and we don't want too big of a pop in the hip. So what we'll do is just go to 164, okay, just a 2 frame difference, and bring up the hip slightly here, and then at about 166 we'll straighten up the hips. Great. Excellent. So with that there, we could even add a little subtle follow through pose with the hips so they don't end too abruptly. So on frame 166, we'll just go a couple of frames after and bring down the hips slightly to the opposite direction. Okay, so we get a little bit more of an organic feel to them. So with these things done, our pose is set for the hips and the rotate Z. Let's go ahead and render off a play blast focusing on our hips, okay, in multiple angles, and we'll start with this back view. Here it is. Great, so the hips look good in the back view. Let's try a 3/4 view. Okay, so we'll find a nice shot where our character is not coming out of it per se. We just really just want to focus on the hips and see if they do match with the rest of our character's motion. So let's render off a play blast from here. Here it is. Awesome. So that wraps up our hips. Okay, and we can now move on to the next lesson, where we'll again make our final changes to complete the heavy pull.